Norwich City know all about just how brutal the Premier League can be, and they got another reminder on the opening day of the season as they were beaten 3-0 by Liverpool at Carrow Road. Welcome to this week's edition of the PinkUn Norwich City Podcast in association with Future Radio 107.8 FM. Dave Freezer here, alongside Paddy Davitt and Connor Southwell, to have a post-match debrief of a chastening opening day of the season. Probably not especially surprising, but we're not going to get too low about it. We all know there's a great deal of context behind this, and I think there are a fair amount of positives to get stuck into as well. But just in the immediate aftermath of the gamepad, there is inevitably a disappointment about what happened in the end, and probably that there was a decent amount of misfortune in the opening two goals as well.
Yeah, I think you sum it up well. I mean, an occasion that started in stirring fashion with the supporters backing and in those numbers and the flags and the flamethrowing, the pyrotechnics. It was, well, Daniel Farke has just said in his post-match, he felt quite small, to be a part of that, and such a special occasion for so many reasons. And that, for me, set the tone for the first, maybe hour or so. In terms of Norwich's approach, they were fearless, they were brave, they were willing to put it up to Liverpool, to be brutally honest. And bar in the end, a rather fortuitous first goal, there wasn't a lot to separate the two sides. But yeah, I think after the break, again, we'll get into the second and third goals in more depth. But once those went in, you could see that there was a gulf there, and Norwich had a bit of a flurry towards the end, and you could arguably say they deserved a consolation strike. But I think in the end, Daniel said it himself, Liverpool deserved the win. But in the context of everything we've talked about liberally recently about this disrupted pre-season, the fact that new signings only came in a matter of days, and yet they're thrust into the fray this evening. Sargent came on, Zolis was on the bench, Rashica, who's been one of the COVID-affected players, he came back in and started tonight. For all those reasons, and I think you do have to put those on the table, because they are mitigation in terms of maybe why they ran out of steam a little bit in the second half. But overall, I keep referring to Daniel, but he's the man who matters in all of this. He said, quote, "It's ridiculous to say, but after that game he feels even more confident that they will be competitive in the Premier League and that they can achieve what they want to." And I think that probably sums it up for me. Yeah, you look at a 3-0 and the ball statistics tell you that they were not good enough in both boxes, but for all those reasons already stated, I think they will extract more in terms of confidence from that moving forward. But sadly, moving forward is a collision with Manchester City, so it's not going to get any easier anytime soon.
Can we just forget about that one for now?
Let's do it.
Well, let's just park the game for a minute and just savour those, I suppose, 10-15 minutes really before kick-off that we've talked about for the last 18 months. Basically, we've been looking forward to that moment, that first on the ball City, that first roar when the players came out, and it was special. And we were seeing social media was a little bit full with queues outside the ground, weren't there? So we were a little bit worried at first. My dad even rang me to say, is the game delayed? There's loads of us outside the South Stand. We're not going to get in. They managed to sort of get that moving, didn't they? And it seemed like the South Stand was pretty full in the end, and just over 27,000 crowd. But I don't mind saying there was a tear in the eye, and the bottom lip quivered a little bit as I just filmed it and savoured it, because we've just waited so long for that moment. And I'm sure there were tears in the stand. It was an epic moment, wasn't it, Connor? It will live with me forever.
Yeah, I'm glad neither of you guys spoke to me, because I think I probably would have gone, to be honest.
Yes,
so I could just sort of bite my lip and get on with it, thankfully, and then the game started, so that was the focus. But yeah, it was lump in the throat stuff, wasn't it? It was really good to see, and like you say, a moment that, well, really 27,000 people have been dreaming of for probably 18 months, and that set the tone for me. The intensity in the first 20 minutes was incredible. Really, it was a really high intensity game that we saw, and that was kind of kick-started by the fans. I arrived at Carrow Road just after 3:30, and the sheer amount of people around the ground, the turnstiles weren't even open until 4. It just kind of captured it for me, the enthusiasm that people had to return. There were smiles on faces, and in many ways, even though a lot of this podcast will go on and sort of dissect the game and analyse the game, it wasn't really about the football on the pitch. I think it was more about those people getting back to Carrow Road, seeing people that they hadn't seen for 18 months, and sharing, as you say, that precious moment that I think a lot of people will carry with them for a very long time. And it was a you were there moment, wasn't it? I think, and there's very few of those in probably sort of a history of being a football fan, and it was really good just to witness it. To be honest, the noise was incredible, for, as I said, not just the first 20 minutes of the game, but probably for the 10-15 minutes before the kickoff. And as I think Daniel summed it up really nicely, actually, in terms of probably humbled the players, probably humbled everyone in that stadium, to be honest. And yeah, what a moment. Certainly not going to be one I forget for a hurry.
It was lovely. It really was. It was everything we'd hoped it would be, really. It was loud, it was emotional, it was passionate, and it just brought back what we've missed so much in those 18 months. And I'm sure you're right there with me, Pad, in hoping that we never, ever, ever have to watch another Norwich City game behind closed doors.
Do you know what? And compounding that, without getting too technical, we're obviously in the City stand, but we're out the back and we're outside. That's where the press areas are. But in that infernal Project Restart period, which was the first attempt after the pandemic to come back and play some games, which was the back end of the previous Premier League season, we were in, if you know your City stand sort of architecture, the glass screen behind, which sort of runs either side of the halfway line. Bearing in mind, back then we were talking June, July, August, and it was pretty hot, and the windows were not open. Yeah. But at the end of tonight's game, I actually just needed to use the gentleman's and had to go to that one down in. So I actually had to go back into a place I never want to go ever again, because it does evoke memories of, as you rightly say, Dave, watching football, but not football as we know it. Just a sterile, empty, skeletal type of football that that is not an experience. If tonight was an experience you will remember, that sadly is an experience I will remember as well, for all the wrong reasons. And we'd never want to get back to that again, and we hope and pray that is not a scenario that any of us have to contemplate anytime soon.
It was great to hear the fans running through songs and stuff, and hopefully there'll be some new ones propping up, because there was quite a funny moment, wasn't there, when the Barclay tried to sing Focus on a Horse, and then it got to Lighten Up Wendy on the Road. Oh, hang on. So they're going to have to think up some new players, aren't they? So what can we do? Gilmore,
Rashica, Campwell and Krul. I think that works.
Yeah, there's a few. There's got to be a few options in the squad, but yeah, the fans sort of need to get their heads together really and work that one out, don't they? But yeah, and that makes you realise as well that in this weird period we've been through, that players like Ollie Skip, didn't ever get a song or a chant, and weirdly, I was looking at some stuff from Christos Jolis after he'd signed that. His whole senior career has been behind closed doors at PAOK, because he came in after the suspension of the season in Greece. I mean, that's bizarre for him to have gone from that to what he witnessed today. Okay, didn't get off the bench, but he must just be absolutely desperate to get on. But anyway, that is the moments that we shall savour, and I guess it was nice that was on TV as well for the people who couldn't be there today, who couldn't get a ticket or who are overseas. Of course, we have many listeners to the pod who are in America and Australia and all over the world, that you will hopefully have felt like you're a bit of a part of that today, and we hope that our coverage will reflect that as well, and not get too down in the dumps about a 3-0 win. But ultimately we must come back round to the football, to the reality of the Premier League, which we all know far too well. To start with, Daniel matching up to Jurgen Klopp's tactics, 4-3-3, wasn't it? And the big decision, I suppose, was Grant Hanley going straight in after 0 pre-season, but he did pretty well, didn't he? Yeah,
I thought he was excellent. He kind of looked like of that back line, probably one of the fittest there, which is a testament, I think, to his professionalism. And he's had 10 days out of the picture because of COVID. If you were a neutral observer, I don't think you'd have known that Grant Hanley had missed a portion of football. And particularly when I think back to 2 years ago when he played at Anfield and he was carrying a slight knock, and he obviously scored the own goal that night, and I think he admitted after the game that his performance maybe wasn't where it wanted to be. That was probably it's probably a positive for him to come back and deliver that kind of performance, and probably answer a few people as well who maybe questioned if he'd be good enough at this level, because if that's his performance when he hasn't had any minutes, then surely it can only improve. And I think we saw a little bit of it kind of in January before the COVID the COVID lockdown before, where some of his performances in the top flight were pretty good. So yeah, he was good. I mean, it's incredibly difficult because ultimately we're talking about a 3-0 loss, and we're talking about attacking players like Salah, Mane, Firmino, who was on the bench, Diego Jota, Oxlade-Chamberlain. There's so many you could throw into there that that's the Premier League, isn't it? And we use the word brutal. That sums it up. You can be really good for, as Norwich were for large portions of the game. I felt particularly first half, tired legs a little bit in the second, but it's in those moments, in those kind of 2 seconds, 3 seconds where someone switches off, or you get a little bit of more misfortune, and you kind of look at the newly promoted sides. And I watched Brentford on Friday night. They were playing an Arsenal side without Aubameyang and Lacazette, and it just makes you think if that's Norwich, do Arsenal rock up and they don't have those two players? It kind of feeds into the luck element again. And then you watch Mo Salah's poor touch sort of dribble through to Jota. So that's the difference, isn't it? But overall, I think Grant Hanley can be incredibly pleased and probably proud of his individual performance. But I think there'll be plenty that Norwich City can be pleased with as well.
Yeah, I thought Liverpool were excellent, really. My feeling at half-time was that if Norwich had been playing a lesser team, playing a Watford or Southampton or something, and were playing like that, with that intensity, I think they probably would have been leading the game at half-time. And they were probably unfortunate. Well, no, that's probably going over the top to say that they were unfortunate to be behind, because you think about the chances that Liverpool actually had in the first half, Lys Malou clearing off the line, Krul tipping the Jota header over. There were a few chances in there, so they probably did deserve to have a 1-0 lead. But yeah, when they bring on Firmino and Fabinho on the hour, Brazil Copa America winners, that shows the strength and depth that they've got that even Arsenal don't have at the moment. Liverpool, Man City, probably Man United and Chelsea. I think we probably have got a big four again at the moment, haven't we? And Arsenal and Tottenham and whoever else are a bit off that level. So, but yeah, to come back round to sort of the starting lineup, Pad, the back five was basically what we expected, wasn't it? So the midfield three was Lys Malou, Gilmour and Rupp. What did you make of those three? I thought Gilmour in particular probably struggled with the pressing, and Keita seemed to just hunt him down most of the game.
Yeah, I think there were some nice touches. I mean, he's a technically gifted footballer. There was a couple of with his back to goal, and the ball's played into him. He's halfway in his own half, and he's just the vision and awareness, clipping them out to Max Aarons, I remember. So he's got that in his locker. But yeah, you're right. If that was the three that he was going to persist with, you would be very concerned, because I don't think they will give enough protection, illustrated by the second goal, the way Mane ran off the back of Gilmour throughout the course of the season. And I don't think they've got enough as a collective in terms of creativity going forward to link front to back. So yeah, that would be, but we know they're looking to bring in a centre mid. We've got Kenny McLean to throw into the mix as well, and maybe a little bit symptomatic of Norwich's overall performance. I thought in Norwich's better periods they looked decent and bright, and there was potential there, but it failed to materialise. And then when Liverpool got on top, then we saw less and less of Gilmour, and ultimately Gilmour is in that side to try and get on the ball, try and control the tempo, try and give Norwich a degree of control. If he's not able to do that, then he's not going to offer too much, and conversely Norwich aren't going to be in control of games, and it did run away from him in that sort of mid-second half period where Liverpool just moved through the gears a little bit, aided by some errors I think from Norwich individually for the goals. But yeah, I mean, I would reserve judgment on the evidence of playing, probably a title contender today, and for all the reasons already stated about Norwich's disrupted pre-season, and likewise next week. I don't think Man City would be, coupled with Liverpool, a benchmark. But moving forward, we'll have a better idea of if that's a mix that can work or a blend. I have my reservations, because I think Gilmour needs a bit more protection around him, dare I say it, a defensive midfielder or two, because that's not his game. And if he had that protection around him, then we might start to see what Klopp said in the build-up, one of the best Scottish talents in the last 50 years.
Yeah, I think I would have much rather had Lys Malou and Gilmour either side of an Ollie Skip. But we're all in agreement that if they can get Ollie Skip back, then they do it, don't they? As I said last week, I think on the pod, he's a £20 million player, so it's a pretty easy conversation. But whether it's Skip, and it probably isn't Skip, or someone else, just somebody with more in the Tete mould, with that defensive nous and the muscle and all these things we've spoken about in recent weeks, I feel like Gilmour would be better freed from that pressure, really. But I don't think there are many teams in the Premier League even who press as much as Liverpool. Their press, I just thought, was exceptional. They really knocked Norwich out of their stride a lot of times. I thought Lys Malou flitted in and out of the game, showed some good stuff. I want more from him in possession, really. And I thought Rupp had a pretty good first half, actually. I thought he was probably the best of the three in the first half, and he was a bit of a ratter, wasn't he? He was really nipping in here and there and working hard, but maybe he just was running on empty in the second half. I expected McLean to come on for him. I thought that would have been a sensible early second half substitution because he just didn't look in the game for me, really. So, like with the whole thing, I probably should have said this a bit earlier. I think, you know, ratings and things like that after this game, they're all in the light of this disrupted pre-season, aren't they? And I don't think any of the Norwich players can be judged too harshly based on this game, and it's probably got to be said that next week's going to be a similar case. Hopefully, but when we get to Leicester, then we can just start to be a bit more on the money with ratings, and that context will be gone, and there's not really excuses around things at that point either. It's like, right, now we need to start seeing some proper tangible forward progress. But the front three as well then, Connor. Rashica started on the left, Cantwell on the right, which is a bit unusual for Todd, isn't it? He nearly scored the goal of the season in the first half as well, didn't he, Todd? And I think that Pukki as well should have passed to Rashica, shouldn't he, instead of when he had that shot. There were promising signs amongst the three of them, but I don't think we saw a consistent 90-minute performance at all from the three of them.
No, and I think sort of when I arrived at Carrow Road this afternoon, I was kind of thinking, right, we need to see enough green shoots, I think, just for all the reasons you said about a disjointed pre-season. I mean, the difference is Norwich had a disjointed pre-season where they had to cancel 2 friendly games, and Liverpool got special dispensation from the Austrian government to go on a training camp abroad. Yeah. So that shows you kind of the difference in preparation for this game. And I really liked, particularly early on, some of Rashica's movement, some of the little combinations that they were working to that side. He looked a real threat once they got him sort of in behind the Liverpool defence. It was just then about that final ball, that final little bit of product, and that's probably where he's maybe, when Daniel speaks about the new additions maybe not quite being tactically where he wants them to be with Norwich. I mean, there are a few times where he was putting a cross in and you see Timothy Pukki standing between Virgil van Dijk and Joel Matip, and it's a bit like that's not quite the kind of outball you would want in that situation. But yeah, he did fade a little bit. I don't think that's surprising for all the sort of context that we've put on this, but I would be very encouraged by that start, particularly given probably that if he's done that against Alexander-Arnold early on, he gave him a real scare defensively. I don't think Alexander-Arnold is exceptionally good. I don't think he's as good defensively as he is going forward. Some of his balls from deep today, by the way, were ridiculous. Yeah. But if he can cause him a threat, then there's no reason why he can't cause fullbacks threat throughout the season, providing Norwich utilise him in the right way. And I think we saw glimpses of kind of what we spoke about, of them trying to be strong in attacking transitions. And he was almost, certainly sort of when you look at the opening half, really, he almost had a higher position than Pukki at times, and then Pukki would drop deep into where you would probably expect that 10 to be. He'd push on and then try and work the space and get in behind the defence that way. It's just, as I said, that final outball. So that was encouraging. I'd probably like to see pace on both sides. I'm not sure. I thought Todd was okay today in moments. Like I said, he scored an exceptional goal, but I think if you're going to play like that, you probably need pace on both sides. So that's an interesting one to watch going forward if Norwich persevere with this system. I think there's enough green shoots there to be positive from an attacking sense. Yeah, it's immensely difficult for Timu Pukki, who I thought looked off the pace, to be honest, still, which is understandable given again the pre-season. But it's going to be fascinating to watch because they obviously didn't have enough goals last time in the Premier League. It was a big burden on Timu, and from the little glimpses that we got today, I think you'd be more optimistic that more players will score more goals this season than what we saw 2 years ago. So, as I said, green shoots. I think that's what we've got to look for in the next few weeks.
particularly that first half. The half-time reception was good, wasn't it? They were applauded off the pitch. That was a very warm reception for the players at that point. I think Todd was it was his pass that played Pookie in that first half as well, wasn't it? In my mind, there's no doubt that Todd Cantwell is a very important player for Norwich, and I felt like today when he got substituted, he got a really big reception, didn't he? And I don't know, maybe he's won over the battles. Maybe the fact that he hasn't gone to Villa or something like that, maybe that's just tipped the balance a little bit for sort of the haters, to put it in his Instagram talk. They don't seem to be so prevalent at the moment. Maybe the appreciation is finally there that Todd Cantwell is an important, very important player to Norwich in a post-Emi Buendia world, and if someone were to turn up, which I don't think they're going to, with 40 million or something in this last couple of weeks of the window, that would be a big blow at this point. So I think that's a good thing. And just sort of finally for the moment, Pad, Josh Sargent came on. We got a bit of a look at him, didn't we? And he's a big lad, but did you think that, because there were some bright moments, do you think that was mainly because Liverpool had taken the foot off the gas a bit by that point? Yeah,
I mean, you'd have to factor that in, but by the same token, he was direct, and there was one excellent shot, and it didn't miss the far post by a huge amount. And I just like the intent that he was willing to get himself in them positions, and clearly keen to make an impression. Why wouldn't he be? It was his first run out in a Norwich shirt, and cameo though it was, and the game was already up. I think he's probably pushed himself forward into Daniel's thoughts for Man City, because ultimately, Daniel was saying they had 14 shots on target, 14 shots, to correct myself, but I can only really remember the Ben Gibson half-hearted, lacking conviction stab from close range that Alisson had to deal with. So that isn't good enough, and if that continues, then Daniel will have inevitably, as he did 2 seasons ago, and it didn't really work out because he took Timo out of the firing line, tried Josip Dermic, and we know how that ended up. But a Sargent, for example, I think if he continues how he started today in a very, albeit small, cameo, then you get to a point where maybe he will look to try him down the centre of the park, because physically, I think that was a surprise. You made it point in during the game. He looked at, from our vantage, as big as, if not bigger than, Ida, who's a very strapping unit. So physically he's got the capacity, I think, to mix it with defenders, even more refined defenders in the Premier League. But I liked some of the technical elements of his game as well. So I think that was a positive as well. And ultimately what they need is to ease the burden on the GOAT, and to do that you need others chipping in. And we saw some signs that could potentially happen, but clearly there is a massive gulf between seeing signs and actual productivity, and that's an area that I think will ultimately be one of the factors deciding on how this season pans out. If they can carry a goal threat, then they're always going to be within games. Yeah, and he was used on the right as well. And to carry on Connor's point, really, those long balls being pumped towards Pookie up against Van Dijk and Matip, Sargent would have been a lot better at dealing with that. And to be fair, he put himself about a bit as well when he came on, didn't he? So that'll be interesting how that develops. Liverpool had 51% of possession, and I think this probably tells the story of the game. As you say, Pad, Norwich had 14 shots but only 3 on target. Liverpool had 19, 8 on target, but they also had 11 corners to Norwich's 3. So, as Daniel Farke said, as I think most people have appreciated, Liverpool deserved the win, and they were very good. Let's pause just for a minute there and hear a bit from Ben Gibson, who I spoke to pretty swiftly after the final whistle.
Ben, well, talk us through that then. You said last week after Newcastle that you all knew it was going to be tough, so this is exactly what you were talking about, isn't it? About sort of keeping calm and things.
Yeah, and I think that was a huge step forward from last week, to be honest. The score is the same, but I thought we win the game for large parts of the game. First goal, I think there's an element of luck to it, to be honest. And look, I think we applied ourselves well. I think we showed what we're about, the way we want to play. Vast improvement for last week. I'm not making excuses, I'm not that kind of guy, but this team and squad haven't played together a lot. And we're still working on things. We're bedding new players in, bedding new things in, and I think that was a huge step forward. Look, the scoreline's the same, which I'm not one of those who comes out after a defeat and is happy to take that on the chin by any means. That's not the person I am, and that's not the team we are. Otherwise, we wouldn't have finished champions last year. But we have to try and take the positives. They're a world-class team. I think they were better than us in the fine margins in both boxes. But look, there's lots to take from it. We don't go away from our principles. We just do them better.
You were there, well, you were right next to it, but did Salah mean that touch, do you think, of the first goal?
No, he hasn't meant it. As I said, there was an element of luck to that. we can react quicker, better. We've still got to deal with that better when it happens. But look, I'll be honest, I'm quite proud of the boys tonight. A lot of teams, fresh out of the Championship, 3-0 down like that, would crumble. We stuck to our beliefs, we stuck to our guns, we kept doing it. That's why we've got to this position, let's not forget that. And as I say, we've got to keep doing those things, but do them better. But there's a lot of positives. I know it doesn't seem it 3-0, but there really is.
Well, another positive we can throw at it is that Norwich will not finish the weekend bottom of the Premier League table, thanks to, I think it was 4 goals in 16 minutes that Leeds conceded in that big derby game at Old Trafford. They lost 5-1. That was shortly after they'd equalised as well, I think. So, Leeds will prop up the Premier League table on Sunday morning. We're recording Saturday straight after the game. Obviously, there's some games on Sunday as well. The other results, Brighton won 2-1 at Burnley. I bet that was a really aesthetically pleasing game to watch. Chelsea won 3-0 at home to Palace. Everton 3, Southampton 1, Leicester 1, Wolves 0, Watford 3, Villa 2, and that is combined, of course, with Brentford beating Arsenal 2-0 on Friday night. So it is a little bit disappointing, isn't it, Connor? I think everybody sort of had their eye on what a nice story that would be, all 3 newly promoted teams winning. Obviously, that would have been a bit of a fairy tale, but I don't think there's any need to panic because. You know, look at 2 seasons ago. Norwich beat Manchester City. They were the reigning champions at the time. 3-2, epic. Yeah, maybe that was Brentford's night. I've predicted Brentford to finish bottom. I've predicted Watford and Palace to also go down as well. And, you know, I still don't think I'm going to chuck those out of the window based on the opening day.
No, I think Brentford will have. I think if they get an easier ride than they got from Arsenal on Friday this season, then I think they'll be in for a big shock. To be honest, I don't think that's likely. They've played a very poor Arsenal side. I mean, Watford again, even though they raced it sort of 3-0 into the lead, were paid back by Aston Villa to an extent. So no, you can't read too much into the opening day of the season. I think we're probably in a unique spot in the Premier League in that it seems clubs either have a really horrible start to the season, as we're kind of talking about Norwich, or they have a really gentle one. I don't think there's really too many clubs who have kind of a little bit of, a big team here and then maybe a winnable fixture. It seems to be one or the other. Norwich obviously fall in the tougher category for whatever reason, but what that will give them is probably an easier in Premier League terms. Obviously, we're well aware from Norwich City's record in the last decade in this league that it's certainly not easier. But maybe a kinder run in towards Christmas and then probably again in the spring. So really, and this is going to be the thing for the Norwich players, because quite feasibly we could get 4 or 5 games in and Norwich might not have a point on the board. That's completely feasible. That doesn't mean that they're doomed. It just means that realistically that they're going to have to get points in that autumn period against teams that they're more likely to extract points from and that will probably define their season greater than the run we're seeing at the moment, which to an extent are 3 hits. I think we're maybe less so Leicester, but certainly maybe even Arsenal on the evidence of Friday. But you have to, I think, just be patient, wait for the table to take shape. I think there'll be people near the top of the Premier League in certainly the opening 5 match days of the season that won't be there come match day 10. So I think it will take time for the league to take shape. I certainly wouldn't read too much into the opening day. Obviously, I would imagine everyone will be itching for that first Premier League win, but then look at it 2 years ago. Norwich made a really good start to life in the Premier League and ran out of steam. So for me, it's just about the players taking that context and not getting too disheartened and maybe not losing confidence because they're being defeated by Liverpool and Manchester City, which I'd imagine 95% of their competitors will as well, if not more, sort of a higher percentage. So yeah, it's going to be a tricky start. It's going to be, as Daniel Farke described, bumpy. It's probably going to get better before it gets worse. But if they can sort of get through to that international break relatively unscathed, then that for me is when this Premier League season really starts for them. I think until then there's probably enough mitigation, enough context to, as you said earlier in terms of ratings, maybe not look at things and analyse them too much, because that disjointed they're effectively 2 weeks behind everyone else, aren't they, in terms of fitness and whatnot. So yeah, difficult to judge. We'll get worse before it gets better, but stick with it.
I tell you, the game that might be looming quite large now, obviously Manchester City, I think we're all basically right. I'd be quite happy for Norwich to go there and park the bus, and if they can find some way to grind out a horrible 0-0 draw, I'd absolutely snap your hand off it right now. I can't see it happening. I think Norwich will still be more about looking to put the pieces in place for the rest of the season and use it as a learning experience up against a top team who play in a similar style to them. I think that's more Daniel Farke's style, isn't it? But I'd be quite happy to see 3 at the back and all that sort of thing, just to try and grind something out. Because if you go toe to toe with Manchester City, I just can't see that this Norwich squad are in a place at the moment. Maybe, hopefully, later in the season they'll be more in a place where they can take on those big teams with that bit more confidence, particularly if we can see the first 45 minutes today become more of a 90-minute performance and they find more consistent seam of things. But yeah, the game that's looming large, I think, for me, Pad, is the one directly after the Manchester City game, which is the Bournemouth Cup game, which we expect to be the Tuesday night, don't we? It's at Carrow Road, second round of the League Cup. I dare say Bournemouth will probably make as many changes as Norwich will, because their focus is purely on Championship promotion, isn't it? So it might be a quite winnable game. Again, it might be quite a big crowd because everyone's going to be up for getting back to Carrow Road and stuff, but that's probably the night that you see Tsimikas get his first start. We could see some quite important clues, and there could be some quite important performances that night which then shape the games ahead.
Definitely. Well, I mean, it precedes Leicester as well, which if it's gone as we fear it might go against Man City, is an increasingly important game. And obviously Leicester are a very, very good side, won again today, and FA Cup winners, Community Shield winners. So Maddison operating, pulling the strings for them, at least at this stage anyway. But if they could get the win, and obviously it'd be the first win of the season, and that bounces them into Leicester with renewed self-belief, I would think, because it was obviously a bruising result today, and it could be more of the same next week. And worth pointing out as well, as Norwich have experienced today with essentially the first full house in 18 months, that will be Man City when Norwich pitch up, because they're away the opening weekend. They're at Tottenham, so you can imagine all the pent-up emotions that Norwich fans have experienced this weekend. That will be the Man City fans. So a task that was hellishly difficult already is, I'm afraid, going to be even tougher because of that facet, because you can be sure Guardiola will want those players to put on a performance befitting the occasion. But yeah, no, I take your point. Yeah, not in the sense that it's about progress in the Carabao Cup per se, but more to get that first win under the belt, albeit in a cup setting, and that, I think, would then give them a platform to really build up for the rest of that week into Leicester, which, for all the reasons I've just stated about how good Leicester are, I think that is a game Norwich, if they can harness the better elements of what we saw today and add to it, and obviously 2 or 3 more weeks fitness into their key players, that's more than a winnable game for me. Leicester have their flaws and their weaknesses, and I think Norwich, if they get a positive result at the start of that week against Bournemouth, then yeah, that could be the start of better times ahead in the Premier League, I think.
Yeah, well, Norwich obviously did quite well against Leicester last time around, didn't they? Won 1-0 at home, drew 1-1 away, wasn't it? And they're better known as a counter-attacking team, aren't they, rather than a pressing team like Liverpool, which, when you look at some of the goals today, the third one, Max completely out of position. The first one, you knew Liss is nowhere near Alexander-Arnold when he swings the ball in. So, yeah, a counter-attacking team, they're going to look to get in behind Norwich's fullbacks, aren't they? But yeah, that press won't be there. Well, I don't think for many games this season. But I guess we should move things on to transfers, because Tuesday will be 2 weeks remaining, won't it? So 11 o'clock on Tuesday night will be 2 weeks left of the window, and I think everybody is in pretty much universal agreement that it's defensive midfielder, centre back, and full back all needed. Where do you think? I think he keeps getting a bit forgotten about. Where do you think Jacob Sorensen fits into all that, Conor? Because I'm kind of leaning towards the fact that maybe he's the centre back. Maybe unless you can find, if you can get a good £10 million centre back, Joe Worrell, Dale Fry, Paddy McNair, whoever, if that's a possible transfer, and that might not be because it might be 15 million, and they can't afford a player that they think is better than what they've got, is Sorensen the fifth centre-back? Because he doesn't look to me, from what we've seen of him, I've not seen enough evidence to see that he is an Alex Tete replacement or an Ollie Skip replacement, and that he is really a defensive midfielder, which is the reputation that he arrived with. I don't know, maybe I'm being too harsh on him. Maybe we'll see him play there against Bournemouth, and as I say, that could be one of those sort of green shoots that you can then tend, and he comes into things. But yeah, how do you see the transfers as we sit here today?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point you make on Sorensen. I would agree. I think every time I've seen him play in midfield, which has been limited, hasn't it, really, because I think the majority of his football for Norwich has come as a makeshift left back, but he looks more like a box to box to me, someone who's probably a bit more dynamic than just a shielder, a protector. And I'd like to just see them get someone who's, I've said this before, really big, someone, a real presence in there. And I think what that would do as well, if you've got that kind of option, sort of shielding the back four, that frees Gilmour up to go and be a bit busier, which I think he can be. I think he can be kind of like a terrier sort of midfielder, someone who does get up and down, get stuck in, and as Paddy mentioned, then I think we may see the best of him in terms of his technical elements as well. There are a few lovely sort of raking passes that he made, and he broke the press a couple of times really nicely, but as you mentioned, I thought Keita did a wonderful job on him, to be honest, and that made it difficult for Norwich to play out in maybe the way that they would have liked, and that as a result we probably didn't see as much of Pukki in terms of in possession than maybe what Norwich would have originally planned for. So yeah, I'd like to get them, I'd like to see a bit more height, a bit more strength now that we're kind of looking, particularly if you're talking central midfield and centre back. Joe Worrell's a really good shout, and I think we've spoken about him before on various podcasts. It's as a player that they've been linked to for a long time, one clearly that they like. So I think that someone of that ilk would be a good option. And then where does Sorensen fit into that? I think it's a good point. It's increasingly difficult, I think, we listed the options: Rook, McLean, Leigh-Malou, Gilmour. There's going to be another on top of that for midfield. That's going to become a very difficult department for him to emerge in. So yeah, you could be right. Maybe as that third centre back, if they don't quite get one over the line, I think they probably will. So that may leave him in a position where it might be, let's have a look in January, and if he needs to go and get some loan football, then get some loan football. But yeah, I think, to be honest, they are a defensive midfielder and probably a centre-back away from having not just a very good window, but also a team that really gives them a chance of staying up.
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward. I mean, it's not straightforward, of course, for Stuart Webber to actually get that done and sign somebody who is good and really bring something to the party. But like the fullback, for instance, and I think there is a lot of us being scarred by what happened 2 years ago. That defensive injury crisis. I think most people are on the same page that if Gibson and Hanley stay fit and they are that partnership in front of Krul, most people are pretty happy with that at this stage of things. But it just feels like attack is sorted, fair enough. That's still got a lot of work to do, obviously. They've just had 2 blanks on the back of a 5-0 against basically Gillingham's reserves. But the back end still needs further options, further filling out.
And we don't want to keep mentioning the guy, but why were Gibson and Hanley so secure and so good last season, albeit at the Championship, step down? Because they had a man called Ollie Skip protecting them superbly in front of them, and it was almost an art form to watch the way that he anticipated counters and put them out at source, and just his athletic ability in a sort of 5-10 yard sort of square in terms of shutting down attacking players, just that athleticism. I think maybe when you take him out of the side, you realise what a quality player he is, and how sorely they miss those type of attributes on the evidence of, albeit a small sample, but the last 2 or 3 pre-season games, and then obviously today. And you mentioned him now. Who was the guy who did a job on Gilmour? Seydou Keita. Well, what is he? He's a very similar type of mould of midfielder. Every top team, the main man at Chelsea, Kante, every top team has an operator who can do that role. And even, I'm sure if you start to look them below the top sides in the Premier League, they all have those type of players. I don't see one in this Norwich midfield mix at the minute, and they need to source somebody, because you're not going to get the best out of Gilmore. I don't think Rupp and Lise Malou are going to be the answer. I don't think McLean is necessarily the answer in that area. And all of that, unfortunately, and again, reference the second goal Liverpool scored today, leaves your centre-backs particularly very vulnerable, and it's asking too much for the back four and Krul every week to sort of repel these invaders coming from midfield, because the quality that is in every Premier League team, they will be tested. And Farker and Webber don't usually miss a trick in these matters, and I'm sure that they know it's almost imperative now that between now and the end of August they address that position. And I'll be taking a keen eye on Tottenham's team sheet when that drops on Sunday against Man City, because if I see Skip in the 11, then I think you can probably close the door on that.
Yeah, and as we've said before, if he's available, it doesn't mean Norwich walk into that situation, does it? There's going to be a huge amount of interest in Ollie Skip if he's available, and there's been talk of Germany as well, haven't there? That clubs in Germany, I think Sessegnon went and had a good season at Hoffenheim, I think, was it last season? So I dare say he'd get in a good German team, and it's kind of become a trend, isn't it? You look at Jude Bellingham, what he's doing at Dortmund since he's left, and that just came into my head. I saw a story the other day that Jude Bellingham's younger brother has just come into the Birmingham team, isn't he? And he's supposed to be hot stuff as well. So everyone laughed at Birmingham when they retired his jersey, didn't they? And it's starting to look like we were all missing a trick there, really, because he's looking like he's going to be a great player. But anyway, I digress. I think that is the debrief in full. Thank you very much, boys. Thank you very much for listening. We will, of course, bring you all that build-up to the Manchester City game. It's going to be a real tough ask for Norwich, but they've got nothing to lose, really, so who knows? They've done it once before. Does lightning strike twice? Probably not, but
they've done it twice before. Johnny House and the slalom run, and that was at the Etihad.
They were on the beach, they weren't they?
Well, you say that, Dave. I'll say 12th place finish after that result.
Didn't Jack Rodwell play for Man City?
I think Joe Hart was in goal, so that's all you need to know.
Then,
yeah. It's a win's a win. That's what it says in the record books. Norwich 3, Man City 2, or 2-3 as it was. So
Norwich played very well that day. They weren't playing Gillingham reserves, were they? They were still up against a good side. But anyway, yes, it will still be very interesting. We'll still be looking for all the little clues about what is to come in the months ahead. But as I said earlier, I think maybe that Bournemouth game a few days later might actually tell us a bit more about where we're going. So it might be one where you just need to put your seatbelt on and make sure it's fastened, shall we say. Thank you very much for listening. This is the PinkUn Norwich City Podcast. We come to you in association with Future Radio 107.8 FM. Do check out PinkUn.com for all the latest Norwich City news and views. If you're not already subscribed to the show, then please do. And if you're not already subscribed to the PinkUn YouTube channel, then that's very much worth checking out as well, because we've got regular video content. We're trying to improve that all the time, make sure it's up to Premier League standard. But for now, thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch up with you very soon.